The Galactic Convergence Council had, in its 4,000-year history, never once issued a formal apology, not when the Velthari Dominion accidentally vaporized 3 of their own colony ships during a navigation demonstration. Not when Ambassador Prox of the Skethian Collective showed up to a peace summit wearing the ceremonial death colors of the Mervon High Court and nearly started a war. Not even when Councillor Breenock of the Ophidian Senate suggested live on galactic broadcast that the Xylorian people looked like someone tried to evolve a mushroom but gave up halfway through. No apology. Not once. But here, on the 4,217th session of the Galactic Convergence Council, Supreme Facilitator Dorvan Keth was sitting in his elevated chair, staring at a document that was apparently going to require one. He read the casualty report again, then he read it a third time. Then he set it down, looked at his aide, a young Skethian named Pelvo, and said, in the most carefully measured tone he could manage, "Pelvo." These numbers, Pelvo, to his credit, did not flinch. He had been preparing for this moment for 2 weeks. Verified by 4 independent systems, sir, cross-referenced with Mervan field observers, Velthari satellite imaging, and our own drone network. Dorvan picked up the document again, set it back down again. The humans lost 4 soldiers. Yes, sir. And the Krethal lost 26,000. 26,412, sir. The final 300 are still being counted. Silence fell over the office like a physical thing, heavy and slightly embarrassed. Now, to understand why this was so thoroughly, spectacularly, cosmically humiliating for the Galactic Convergence Council, you need to understand what the Council had said about humanity, approximately 14 months prior. The meeting had been called because humanity had quite cheerfully applied for membership in the Galactic Convergence. They had submitted their application with what could only be described as enthusiastic confidence. The application included a 30-page summary of human military history, a detailed breakdown of their industrial capacity, several photographs of what they called cities, and, inexplicably, a recipe for something called chili. Nobody asked for the recipe. They included it anyway. The Council had reviewed the application with the particular brand of polite condescension that older civilizations reserve for species who are technically advanced enough to find the Council but not quite advanced enough to know when they are out of their depth. Councillor Vreth of the Mervon High Court had been the first to speak during the review session. They are small, she said, studying the holographic display of a human male standing next to what the application described as a main battle tank. The tank was, admittedly, quite large. The human standing next to it was, by galactic standards, roughly the size of a Skethian juvenile. Bipedal, noted Ambassador Soren of the Velthari Dominion, as if this were a medical diagnosis. Soft exterior, no natural armor plating, no venom glands, no secondary respiratory system. He scrolled through the biological assessment. Extremely limited sensory range. They can barely detect magnetic fields. Their thermal vision is practically non-existent. He paused. They sleep every single cycle. Every cycle? Councillor Vreth looked genuinely startled. Without fail? Apparently if they do not, they begin experiencing perceptual disturbances and eventually die. The room had gone very quiet. So, said Dorvan Keth, who had been facilitator for 60 years and had seen species come and go like seasons, what you are telling me is that this species has no armor, limited senses, requires regular unconsciousness to function, and is roughly the size of prey on their own planet. Correct, said Sauron. And they want to join a galactic governing body that currently includes the Krethal. The Krethal, for reference, were 8 feet tall, had triple-layered bone plating beneath their skin, communicated partly through subsonic vibrations that could shatter glass, and had once won a war by standing still and waiting for their enemies to get tired of shooting at them. The Council had looked at each other, and then Councillor Vreth had said something that would later be replayed, analyzed, and quoted back to her approximately 400,000 times. Perhaps, she said, we should offer them an observer status. Let them attend sessions, watch how real governance works, and in a few centuries, once they have had time to develop properly, they can reapply. The vote to grant humanity observer status rather than full membership had been unanimous. All 22 councillors, unanimous. This fact would age like fresh milk on a summer afternoon. Humanity, for its part, had accepted the observer status with what could only be described as suspicious cheerfulness. Their official representative, a woman named Dara Solte, had shown up to her first council session wearing what she called a formal suit, which was a layer of woven fiber over her soft, unarmored body, shook hands with everyone in the room, including Councillor Breenock, whose species communicated touch as a form of threat, and then sat down in the observer's box with a small cup of a hot liquid she called coffee. She attended every session. She took notes. She asked questions that were somehow simultaneously very simple and deeply uncomfortable. Like the time she had asked, in a perfectly pleasant tone, Why the Velthari Dominion's trade agreement with the Mervan excluded economic benefit sharing for the 14 smaller species. The agreement was supposedly designed to help, and then, before Soren could answer, produced a 16-page breakdown she had apparently prepared just in case, or the time she had pointed out, with the calm precision of someone who had been raised on a planet where everything, from the weather to the other animals, was actively trying to end you, that the Council's defense treaty with the Outer Ring colonies had a clause in it that would legally require the colonies to provide military support to the core worlds in an invasion scenario, but contained no reciprocal obligation. So what you have written, she had said, tapping the document, is not a mutual defense treaty. It is a conscription agreement with extra steps. There had been a long silence. You are an observer, Councillor Vreth had reminded her. Yes, said Dara Sulte, I am observing. The Council had developed over several months what Pelvo privately called the Sulte expression. It was the face of someone who was technically not being argued with, technically not being corrected, technically not being outwitted, and yet somehow experiencing all three simultaneously. And then the Krethal problem had arrived. The Kredial Imperium had been, for about 200 years, slowly expanding toward the Outer Ring. Not aggressively, technically. They never declared war. They simply moved colony ships, resource extraction operations, military observation outposts that were definitely not weapons platforms, according to the Kredial ambassador, who said this with the confidence of someone who knew nobody was going to argue with him because he was 8 feet tall and bullet-resistant. The Outer Ring colonies had been asking the Council for help for 40 years. The Council had been issuing formal diplomatic concerns for 40 years. The Krethahal had been collecting those formal diplomatic concerns, and, it was later discovered, using them as fuel for their warships. Not metaphorically, literally. They had developed a paper-based combustion supplement system and found Council correspondence to be an excellent heat source. And then, 14 months ago, the Krethal had moved on Velran Station. Velran Station was not a military installation, it was a trade hub. 40,000 civilians from 9 different species. The Krethal had issued a resource acquisition notice, which was their legal framework for taking things, and given the station's population 48 hours to evacuate. The Council had convened an emergency session. They had debated for 36 of those 48 hours. They had passed a resolution, a strongly worded one. Dara Sulte, sitting in the observer's box with her coffee, had listened to the entire 36-hour debate in silence, which was unusual for her. People had noticed. When the resolution passed, she had stood up. I need to make a call, she had said, and walked out of the chamber. Nobody thought much of it. What happened next was the subject of, at current count, 47 academic papers, 3 historical reviews, 1 Mervan theatrical production, and a Velthari documentary series that was, admittedly, not entirely flattering to the Council. With 12 hours left on the Krethal's evacuation notice, 4 human vessels had arrived at Velran Station. 4. The Krethal fleet at Velran was composed of 18 warships, each one 3 times the mass of the largest human vessel. The Krethal commander, a decorated veteran named Virak Heth, had opened communications fully expecting to offer the humans the same 48-hour window he had offered the station. He did not get to speak first. The message from the lead human vessel came through with 0 preamble, 0 diplomatic softening, and what communications analysts later described as remarkable economy of language. Velran Station is under our protection. You have 6 hours to withdraw. Every hour past that adds consequences. Your choice. Virak Heth had stared at his communications screen. Then he had laughed. He had laughed for quite some time. His crew had laughed. The laughter had been transmitted back, accidentally, through an open channel, which was why it was on record. Which was why it was later played back to him. In detail. At length. Virak Heth did not respond to the human message. He considered it the most generous thing he could do for them. He would later reflect from his recovery facility, an idiot. Because the humans had not been bluffing. They had also not been finished preparing. Here is what the Council knew had happened at Velran, pieced together from drone footage, Mervan observer logs, and a deeply traumatized Krethal navigation officer who could not stop describing it to anyone who would listen. The 4 human vessels had not opened fire immediately. They had, instead, begun moving, not in any pattern that Krethal tactical systems could immediately classify. The movement analysis programs aboard Virak Heth's command ship had processed the human approach vectors for 3 full minutes before returning an assessment. The assessment said, and this is a direct translation, this movement pattern does not match any known tactical doctrine. Initiating expanded comparison against non-military databases. 3 more minutes. The expanded comparison came back. Closest match found in prey evasion behavior patterns of several species. Confidence level, 41%. The human ships were flying like something being chased, except nothing was chasing them. except they were the ones who had just told the Krethal fleet to leave. Burak Heth's tactical officer, a veteran of 11 campaigns, had looked at her commander and said, "Sir, I think they are doing this on purpose." Burak Heth had ordered his forward guns to target the lead human ship. The lead human ship went sideways, not turned, sideways, the way a biological creature might dodge. The Krethal targeting systems, which were calibrated for ships that moved like ships, had required 0.8 seconds to reacquire the target. In those 0.8 seconds, the human ship had moved again, and the second human ship had fired, not at a Krethal warship, at the weapon platform on the Krethal flagship's starboard side. The shot was, by any measure, absurdly precise. It hit the junction between the platform and the primary hull, the one spot where the Krethal's triple redundant armor plating had a seam. The platform did not explode. It simply stopped working. It went dark, and stayed dark. They knew where to shoot, the navigation officer had told council investigators later, his voice still carrying the particular quality of someone who had witnessed something that rearranged their understanding of the universe. They knew the exact weak point. They did not scan for it. They already knew. Dorvan Keth had looked up from the deposition to ask the obvious question. How? The answer had come from Dara Salte's office, delivered with the tone of someone explaining something very obvious. "We have been attending every council session for 8 months, her office had replied in writing. The Krethal submitted full ship specifications to the Council Defense Registry in Year 3 of their Outer Ring expansion as required by treaty. The registry is a public document, a pause, expressed in the form of a paragraph break. We read it. The battle, if it could be called that, had lasted 40 minutes. The 4 human ships had engaged 18 Krethal warships for 40 minutes. 3 of the human ships had taken damage, 1 had taken significant damage and had been forced to withdraw after 22 minutes. But by the time it withdrew, 6 Krethal warships were non-functional, and 4 more were retreating. And then reinforcements had arrived, not more human ships. Dara Solte had made more than one call. She had contacted, directly and personally, every Outer Ring colony that the Krethal had been slowly squeezing for 40 years. She had offered them something the Council's resolution had not: a plan. The reinforcements were 12 ships from 5 different Outer Ring species, none of whom had ever fought together before, none of whom had compatible communication systems, none of whom had trained for combined operations. What they had was a human officer aboard each ship with a communication relay, acting as translator and coordinator. What they also had, it turned out, was 40 years of very motivated anger at the Krethal. The remaining Krethal ships withdrew from Velran Station at hour 5 of the 6-hour window the humans had given them, 1 hour early. The Krethal, it would later be noted, had never once withdrawn early from anything in 200 years of expansion. The casualty report on Dorvan Keth's desk was the result: 26,412 Krethal casualties, 4 human casualties, and 2 human soldiers who had, per the report, sustained injuries they described as fine, and honestly I have had worse, neither of whom had accepted medical transport. Dorvan set the document down. "Pelvo," he said slowly. "When the human representative applied for full membership, when we voted to give them observer status instead, was that vote recorded?" Pelvo's expression did not change. Pelvo was very good at keeping his expression from changing. "Every council vote is recorded, sir. Public record. And is there a way it is not?" "No, sir." Another long silence. "And Dara Solte," Dorvan said carefully. "She is aware that we voted. She was in the room, sir." "Yes." Dorvan looked at the casualty report one more time. She was observing. Outside the window of his office, the lights of the council complex glittered against the dark. Somewhere in this building, he knew, Dara Solte was sitting in her observer's box, with her coffee, probably taking notes. He thought about her tone during those 8 months. Calm. Precise. Perfectly pleasant. He had spent 8 months assuming her pleasantness was the politeness of a lesser species grateful for the opportunity to watch their betters at work. He was now considering the possibility that it had been something else entirely. The expression, he now realized, that he had identified as patience on her face during every session, every debate, every unanimous vote to keep humanity at arm's length. That expression had a different name. It was the expression of someone who already knew how this was going to go. He picked up the document one more time. 26,412, verses 4. "Pelvo," he said. "Schedule a full council session. Agenda item 1. He set the paper down with the careful precision of a man who was composing himself for something large. Human membership review. Pelvo made a note. And Pelvo. "Sir, send Representative Solte a formal invitation. Not the observer notification. The full member pre-session brief." Pelvo looked up. "She is still officially an observer, sir." Dorvan Keth, Supreme Facilitator of the Galactic Convergence Council. A man who had shepherded galactic politics for 60 years without once apologizing for anything, straightened the casualty report on his desk. "I am aware," he said quietly, "of what she officially is." He looked out the window again. "I am becoming less certain," he added, "of what we officially are." The full council chamber of the Galactic Convergence was, by any reasonable measure, an impressive room. It seated 240 beings across 22 delegation platforms, each one elevated at precisely calculated angles to ensure that no species appeared physically dominant over another. The ceiling stretched 40 meters overhead, inlaid with a mosaic depicting every member civilization's home star. The acoustics were engineered so that even the quietest whisper could be heard clearly at the farthest point in the room. The designers had thought of everything. They had not thought of Casualty. She arrived 12 minutes early, which nobody had expected, because the formal invitation sent to her office had been for a session beginning at the third rotation mark, and no galactic dignitary in 4,000 years of council history had arrived early to anything. Arriving early was considered, in most council cultures, a form of aggression. It implied the other party was making you wait. Casualty arrived 12 minutes early, set a fresh cup of coffee on the observer's ledge, which she had apparently decided was still her spot regardless of what the seating arrangement said, and opened a document on her personal display. She was still reading when the first councillors filed in. Councillor Vreth of the Mervan High Court entered third, spotted Casualty already seated, and stopped walking for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, long enough for her aide to walk into her from behind. Casualty looked up, nodded pleasantly, and went back to her document. Vreth took her seat with the careful dignity of someone who had absolutely not just been startled by a human. By the time Dorvan Keth took the facilitator's chair, every delegation was present, which was itself unusual. Full attendance at council sessions was rare. People had things to do, wars to manage, economies to balance, species to govern. Today apparently everyone had cleared their schedule. Dorvan surveyed the room. 22 delegation platforms, 211 beings, one human sitting in the observer's box with a ceramic cup. He brought the session to order. "This session," he began, "has been called to address a single agenda item, the formal review of humanity's membership application to the Galactic Convergence." He paused. "Before we proceed, I would like to acknowledge that the events at Velran Station have been officially logged, independently verified, and entered into the permanent council record." Silence. "I would also like to acknowledge," he continued, in the tone of a man who had practiced this sentence 17 times in front of a mirror, "that the council's previous assessment of humanity's capabilities was conducted without the benefit of direct observation." From the observer's box, Casualty made a small sound. It was extremely quiet. It might have been a response to something in her document. Dorvan was quite certain it was not. "We will open the floor to delegation statements before inviting Representative Casualty to address the council." Ambassador Soren of the Velthari Dominion went first. He was, Dorvan noted, looking somewhat more prepared than usual, which for Soren meant he had clearly stayed up thinking about what to say, and had still not fully landed on it. "The Velthari Dominion," Soren began, "wishes to express its admiration for the efficiency demonstrated at Velran Station." He paused. "We also wish to note that we had always considered humanity a promising species." From the observer's box, Sultar turned a page. The sound was very audible in the silence. Soren cleared his throat. "We support full membership review." Councillor Vreth went next. She was a tall being. Vreth with 6 upper limbs and a way of arranging herself that suggested permanent judgment. She had ruled the Mervan High Court's council delegation for 80 years. She had survived 6 different galactic crises, 3 internal coups, and 1 incident involving a misaddressed bioweapon that she never spoke about publicly. She was, by any measure, not easily rattled. She had also been the one to say on record that humanity needed a few centuries to develop properly. She stood. She looked at Casualty. Casualty looked back, in the way that a person looks at someone they are paying polite attention to and have been paying polite attention to for a long time. "The Mervan High Court," Vreth said carefully, "supports the immediate elevation of humanity to provisional full membership, pending the standard verification period." She stopped, then added, with the precision of someone choosing every word like they were diffusing something, "We also note that our previous classification of human military capacity was based on incomplete data. We have updated our files." Casualty nodded. "Thank you, Counselor." Vreth sat down. Her aide leaned over and whispered something. Vreth whispered back. The aide nodded and wrote something down. The delegation statements took 40 minutes. Every single one expressed support for the membership review. Several of them included compliments for the Velran operation. 2 of them mentioned, almost as afterthoughts, that they had always had great respect for humanity. Dorvan had been in politics long enough to recognize what was happening. The council was not paying tribute to humanity. The council was repositioning, Every delegation in this room had, 1 year ago, voted unanimously to give humanity a seat in the corner and tell them to watch quietly. Every single one of them was now carefully constructing a version of events in which they had never really done that, or had done it for entirely reasonable reasons, or had perhaps not done it as enthusiastically as the voting record suggested. Politics, in every species and every century, came down to the same essential skill: revising history fast enough that nobody could catch you doing it. He was fairly certain Dara Sulte had read every revision theory ever written. "Representative Sulte," he said, when the last delegation had finished, "the floor is yours." She stood. She did not bring her coffee. She left it on the ledge, still warm, as if she fully intended to come back to it. She walked to the central address platform. Not the observers' annex, which had a smaller podium designed to remind observers of their status. The central platform. She had apparently decided that the invitation meant the central platform, and nobody had told her otherwise, possibly because the aide responsible for clarifying this had looked at the situation and decided not to get involved. She stood at the central platform and looked out at 211 beings from 22 civilizations, all of whom were looking back at her with the focused attention of people who had recently and significantly updated their priors about what exactly they were looking at. She was not particularly imposing, physically. This was the thing that got people. She was average height for a human, which put her at roughly 2/3 the size of most beings in the room. She had what humans called dark brown hair, worn in a style that Mervan diplomatic analysts had spent 3 weeks trying to decode for cultural significance before concluding it was simply how she preferred it. She was wearing the same type of woven fiber outfit she always wore. She looked in every measurable way like someone who should have been nervous. She was not nervous. She had never been nervous, Dorvan realized. Not once in 8 months of sessions. He had read nervousness onto her because he had expected it, because species in the observer's box were supposed to be nervous. "Thank you, Facilitator Keth," she said, "and thank you to the Council for the invitation." Her tone was pleasant. It was always pleasant. This was, Dorvan now understood, a choice. "I want to be clear about what happened at Velrun," she said, "because I think there may be some uncertainty about the sequence of decisions." She paused, looked around the room. "I did not decide to intervene at Velran because I thought humanity was ready to prove something. I decided to intervene because 40,000 civilians had 48 hours before they lost their homes, and the body with the authority and the resources to stop it had spent 36 of those hours drafting a resolution." Another pause. "We had 12 hours, so we moved." The room was very quiet. "The Krathal miscalculated," she continued, "not because they underestimated human ships. Our ships are, by galactic standard metrics, genuinely not impressive. They miscalculated because they assumed a species that cannot be easily hurt physically must be hard to motivate." She let that sit for just a moment. "We are not hard to motivate. We are historically extremely easy to motivate. What is difficult is getting us to stop." Councillor Breenek of the Ophidian Senate, who had not spoken during the delegation statements, leaned forward slightly. He was a long horizontal being, Breenek resembling to human eyes, something between a very large snake and an architectural feature. "The Velran action involved coordination with Outer Ring forces," he said. It was not a question. Yes. Forces who had no history of combined operations, no shared communication infrastructure, no unified command structure. Correct. How? Dara Sulte looked at him with the expression of someone who was about to say something that sounded simple and was not. "We talked to them," she said. "Breenak's translation unit processed this." "That is not," he said slowly, "a sufficient explanation for the level of coordination demonstrated." "No," she agreed, "but it is the accurate one." She turned to address the full room. "We have been on Earth for 200,000 years. In that time, we have had to talk to people who did not share our language, our culture, our history, or our values, and convince them to work together for a common goal. We have had to do this repeatedly, under pressure, with very little time." She paused. "We got good at it. It is not a military skill. It is not a technological advantage. It is a very old, very human habit that we have never been able to get rid of, no matter how many times it has made things complicated." She reached into the document she had brought with her, and set something on the podium surface, a small physical object, paper, folded twice. "This is the Velran Coordination Protocol," she said. "Every communication relay frequency, every timing sequence, every command decision hierarchy we used during the engagement. 14 pages. She looked out at the room. "The Velthari Defense Directorate uses a coordination manual that runs to 4,000 pages and requires 18 months of specialized training before any officer is certified to use it in combined operations." She did not say. "And 4 human soldiers died while your 22 civilizations wrote resolutions." She did not have to. Dorvan Keth called a brief recess after the address, and the council room dissolved into the particular kind of controlled noise that happens when 200 beings from 22 civilizations all have something urgent to say to the person next to them but are trying to appear calm about it. In the hallway outside the main chamber, Pelvo fell into step beside Dorvan. "Thoughts?" Dorvan asked. She held back. Pelvo said immediately. Dorvan glanced at him. "She could have listed specific votes," Pelvo said. "Named specific statements. She has the record. She has been taking notes in that box for 8 months. She has everything, and she did not use any of it." Dorvan walked in silence for a moment. "She is not trying to embarrass us," he said. "No, sir. She is trying to join us." "Yes, sir, but she is also making certain we understand the full geometry of the situation." Pelvo paused. "She is being kind about it." Dorvan stopped walking, stood in the corridor, thought about 8 months of sessions, 8 months of questions that were technically requests for clarification, 8 months of a woman sitting in the corner of the most powerful political body in the galaxy, drinking coffee, taking notes, waiting. "She knew," he said, "from the beginning. She knew we would eventually need to have this conversation. I think," Pelvo said carefully, "that she knew the Krethal situation was going to force the issue before a formal application would." He considered. "I think she came here to observe, and then waited for an event that would make the conversation unavoidable. She engineered the sequence." "I do not think she engineered the Krethal's decision to move on Velran, sir." "No, but she was ready for it." Dorvan looked down the corridor toward the chamber doors. 8 months in that observer's box, and she was ready for it inside 12 hours. Pelvo said nothing. "The chili," Dorvan said. Pelvo blinked. "Sir? The recipe. In the original membership application. The chili recipe." Dorvan turned toward the chamber. "I thought it was an error. A cultural misunderstanding of the application format. It was not? I am no longer sure anything she or her government has done in this process was accidental." When the session resumed, it was Councillor Vreth who spoke first. She had clearly used the recess to make a decision, and the decision sat on her face with the settled quality of something that had been put down and was not being picked back up. "Representative Solte," she said, "I would like to ask a direct question." "Please," said Solte. "If the Council votes today to grant humanity full membership, effective immediately, what does humanity want from that membership?" The room went quiet again. Not the polite, expectant quiet of a formal session, the particular sharp silence that falls when someone asks the question that everyone has been carefully not asking. Solte stood at the central platform and did not take more than 2 seconds to answer. "Access to the resource registry," she said. "Full treaty participation rights. A seat on the Defense Review Committee." She paused. "And retrospective consultation rights for the Outer Ring development agreements." "Retrospective consultation," Vreth repeated. "The agreements that have been systematically deprioritizing Outer Ring infrastructure funding for 60 years. Yes." Solte's tone did not change. It was still pleasant. "They were written before humanity was here to review them. We would like to review them now." The room had a specific kind of energy in it that Dorvan had only felt a few times in his career. It was the energy of a negotiation that everyone had walked into thinking they were on one side of and were now realizing they might be on the other. Councillor Brenick made a sound that his translation unit rendered as, "This seems reasonable." Ambassador Soren was looking at the ceiling with the focused attention of someone doing very rapid calculations. Councillor Vreth said, "Those agreements are among 14 sitting member civilizations." "I know," said Solte. "I have read them. Renegotiating them would require unanimous council approval." "I know," said Solte again. "I have read the procedural charter." "You have read the procedural charter," Vreth said flatly. "I had time," Solte said. "I was in the observer's box for 8 months. The vote took place an hour later. Full membership, effective immediately. Unanimous, again. 22 civilizations, every single one. The difference was that this time, the vote went the other way." Dorvan called the result and watched Dara Solte receive it. She nodded. She said, "Thank you, facilitator." She walked back to the observer's box, picked up her coffee cup, which was cold by now, took a sip of it anyway, and sat down. She was already writing something. Dorvan watched her for a moment. "She is drafting the consultation request," Pelvo said from behind him, "for the Outer Ring agreements. Already. She probably had the first draft written before the session." Dorvan had been in politics for 60 years. He had navigated 4 galactic crises, 2 internal council schisms, and the single most complicated trade dispute in recorded history, which had involved 12 species, a misidentified mineral deposit, and what turned out to be a very expensive misunderstanding about the Velthari word for approximately. He was not, he decided, the most strategically sophisticated mind in this building anymore. He was not even certain he was in the top 2. "Send a message to the Krethal ambassador," he said to Pelvo. "What message, sir?" Tell him the Galactic Convergence has a new full member. He paused. And tell him the new member has requested a seat on the Defense Review Committee and would very much like to schedule a review of Krethal military registry submissions. Pelvo made a note. Should I frame it diplomatically, sir? Dorvan thought about Vurak Heth, laughing on an open channel at 4 small ships. He thought about 26,412. He thought about 4. Frame it, he said, accurately. Later that evening, when the chamber had cleared and the cleaning systems were cycling through, Dorvan stood at the window of his office and looked out at the lights of the council complex. Somewhere below, he knew, Dara Sulte was in the Humanity delegation's newly assigned offices. Full offices now, not the Observer Annex. She had, per the facilities report Pelvo had sent him, immediately requested a coffee preparation unit, a faster data terminal, and, for reasons the facilities team had not been able to determine, a window that faced east. She had not requested a larger space. She had not requested a higher floor. She had not requested any of the status markers that every other new member species had required. In 4,000 years of council history, as their first act of formal membership, she had asked for coffee, a better terminal, and an eastern window. He thought about what she had said on the central platform. We are extremely easy to motivate. What is difficult is getting us to stop. He looked at the lights of the complex, spread out across the dark 22 civilizations, all running and humming and continuing, the way they had continued for centuries. He thought about a species with no armor, limited senses, regular unconsciousness requirements, and a historical record that read, in summary, as, tried everything, survived everything, talked to everyone, refused to stop. He thought about the chili recipe, still sitting in the membership application file. He was going to find out what chili was. This seemed, suddenly, important. Pelvo, he said. His aide appeared in the doorway. Yes, sir? In the morning, Dorvan said. Set up an introductory meeting between myself and Representative Sulte. He turned from the window. Informal, no agenda. Pelvo's expression did very little, but his writing instrument paused for just a fraction of a second. No agenda, sir, no agenda. Dorvan walked to his desk and straightened the casualty report, which was still there, which he had not filed, which he suspected he was not going to file for some time. I want to understand how she thinks. And if she asks what the meeting is for? Dorvan Keth, Supreme Facilitator of the Galactic Convergence Council, a man who had never once issued a formal apology in 60 years of governance, and who was currently reconsidering whether that streak might need to end sometime soon, looked at the casualty report. 26,412, verses 4. Tell her, he said quietly, that I want to talk. He paused, and tell her she can bring the coffee.